Howdy, folks. Welcome to our Clean Coast, Texas Lunch and Learn. Today, we're going to be hearing from Alex Nuñez with Texas Parks and Wildlife. He's a pollution biologist on the Kills and Spills team. You'll also be hearing Jason Pinchback from the General Land Office. And right now, you're seeing me, Leah Cuddyback, with the Meadows Center for Water and the Environment, and we're helping to kind of facilitate these lunch and learns. If this is your first lunch and learn with us, welcome. If you've been to our lunch and learns in the past, welcome back. Today, we're going to kind of kick things off with a little poll question so we can get a view of who's in the room. And if you wouldn't mind, when you see this pop up on your screen.
Can you hear it?
Yeah, let's see. So when you see it pop up on your screen, feel free to just answer the polling question and let us know a little bit about yourself. When you join, please make sure you're kind of muting your audio so we're not getting a bunch of feedback from different folks, and that should help us in the long run. So as you're logging in, enter your stakeholder information. We'd love to know a little bit about you, what your role is in your community, if you're an elected official, if you're part of your city staff. We'd also love to know where you're zooming in from, and you can send us a message in the chat that will let us know. Today we're going to be using the chat function so that we can kind of have some conversation. And if you're not familiar with Zoom, don't know where you've been for the past year, but welcome. This is a Zoom meeting, so our chat function allows us to kind of have some conversation between our attendees. And you can go ahead and drop a message in the chat, say where you're zooming in from, give us a little bit more information about your organization. And we'll also be sharing some helpful links throughout the webinar today in the chat. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and let Jason Pinchback with the General Land Office take over for a bit and introduce himself. He'll kind of give you an overview of what today's meeting will look like. And then he'll get us started and remind you all that we need you to enter your poll information and keep yourself muted while our speakers are presenting. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jason Pinchback. I work at the Texas General Land Office in the Water Resources Program. We're super excited here to present our third Lunch and Learn series. Part of the idea behind the Lunch and Learn is for those in the water community or in the natural resource community, we often have a lot of conversations, whether they're hallway conversations, whether they're conversations at meetings or conferences. We travel and we have like a really meaningful dialogue. And a lot of this dialogue is really not so easy to reach just to the masses and everybody else in the community. So part of what we wanted to do was to capture these some of these dialogues, some bite-sized bits if you get for our Lunch and Learn, and to have this information readily available, readily accessible in ways that won't be prohibitive, such as going to a conference in another area or spending all day at a meeting. So the concept here is we're going to have about 30 minutes of presentations followed by question and answers. Later, we'll present links in our chat box that will reference our previous Lunch and Learn efforts. This is part of a larger program called Clean Coast, Texas, which was launched by the Texas General Land Office in January. And the main goal of this program is to work with local jurisdictions in the coastal zone to enhance the management of non-point source pollution, ideally bring in more resiliency, better habitat, better water quality, fewer beach advisories, so on and so forth. Part of this series here today is focusing on harmful algal blooms and is going to feature Alex Nuñez. Before we introduce him, I want to ask Leah if we have quite a few poll information that's completed here and if she has anything to share for us based on these polls.
Totally, Jason. Thanks for asking. I will go ahead and share those results now. So folks should be able to see on their screen a little pop-up that shows the breakdown of who's attending. It's looking like most folks are either in our other category or in the city or county government staff realm. So welcome. We've also got a lot of folks from nonprofit education realm. We've got some elected officials and a fair number of residents, landowners. So thanks for tuning in.
Thanks, Leah. one of the things during the presentation, Alex will go through his information. At the end of his presentation, we will have a Q&A session. Just because of the unpredictability of Zoom and everybody, we're asking that the questions and answers be facilitated through the chat. So if you have those at any point, feel free to go ahead and place your question into the chat box, and we'll start at the top and we'll work our way through that. Without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Mr. Alex Nuñez. He is the Lower Coast Regional Response Coordinator for the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department Kills and Spills Team, often referred to as CAST. He's held this position for about 15 years. The primary function of CAST is to investigate fish kill and pollution events that impact fish and wildlife resources and determine the source and cause of the mortality event. Activities include responding to fish and wildlife kills related to harmful algal blooms. The team also provides technical guidance on water quality issues to minimize impacts to fish and wildlife resources. He received his bachelor's degree in biology and master's degree in environmental science at Texas A&M Corpus Christi. Prior to his employment with TPWD, Alex worked on water and sediment quality related studies at Texas A&M Corpus, the Center for Coastal Studies. Without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Mr. Alex Nuñez.
Thank you, Jason. I want to thank you all very much for allowing me to do this presentation. And with that, let's go ahead and share the screen. Okay. And is it okay if I remove the poll?
Yes, you can just click the box on the top right to X that out. And we have your presentation on the screen now.
All right, good deal. Well, again, thank you very much for allowing me to present to this group. Pretty excited about this. First of all, I want to kind of go over what we're going to discuss. First, it's just going to be a broad overview of what HABs are, defining what they are, recognizing that algae is within the water community, and it is something that's natural. Talk about the impacts to HABs and then overly discuss Texas' overall response, focusing more on the coast. And then we're going to dig much deeper into our agencies, Texas Parks and Wildlife Department's response activities and how it contributes to the overall resiliency of our coastal community. So real quick, just a brief definition, what are blooms? Simple photosynthetic organisms that live in fresh and saltwater systems. Now, as I mentioned before, they do contribute to a healthy system by consuming nutrients. They also are a food source for fish and other animals. They also produce oxygen in the water columns, so it helps our organisms breathe and contributes to the environment. So real quick, what makes a harmful algal bloom? So algal blooms form when algae grow out of control, and blooms themselves aren't necessarily bad. They, as I mentioned, they occur naturally. However, whenever it becomes an issue whenever it's the duration of the bloom and the frequency of the blooms. So you may be out, look at the bay, you may see some discolored water, and that's not necessarily an indicator of a poor system. But if there's a bloom where it occurs frequently, or the duration is over extended period of time, that may be an indicator of ecosystem out of balance. So HABs, by definition, are blooms that produce toxic or harmful effects on people, fish, shellfish, marine mammals, and birds. The impacts may include shading effects, poor food sources, hypoxia, or even toxin production. So by definition, pollution complaints don't necessarily fit under the HAB definition, but it is not uncommon for us to receive notifications of concerns of pollution events as a result of algal blooms. So the impact is actually, it pulls our responders away from other responses for them to investigate these incidences that are not an oil release or a hazardous substance release. So the photo on the left was a oil spill notification of old moosey oil material from unknown source. So we got notification from our partners, went out there, conducted investigation, and verified that this is an actual algal bloom. One of them being a trichodesmia bloom, not uncommon, but is commonly called in as a unknown oil spill. The photo on the right was a notification of a hazardous substance release. This was actually a Noctiluca bloom, but it was called in as an unknown hazardous substance. Now the Noctiluca bloom, it's very cool. This is a really cool bloom because it produces bioluminescence at night. So as the water is stirring and mixes, it glows. So that's actually a pretty cool phenomenon. It doesn't necessarily cause any fish kills, but it is known to be seen along the Texas coast. Now, moving on to, going to go ahead and use Texas brown tide. It's generally observed in the Baffin Bay area, upper Laguna Madre, central coast of Texas, central lower coast of Texas along the coastal bend. Now, this is an example of concerns of shading and poor food source. Following a freeze kill event in the 90s, we started seeing these bloom events occur in the Baffin Bay area. Occur for long durations of time. Didn't necessarily see any large scale mortality events related to it or any small scale mortality events related to it. However, as time progressed, there was evidence of increased chlorophyll, increased blooms in the Baffin Bay area. They were starting to see some concerns of impacts to black drum emaciation, which spurred an increase, a need to enhance our knowledge of what's going on and understand the system itself, the drivers of the system. So we're using brown tide as an example of shading of potentially poor food sources for the environment. Now, this initiated a work group called the Baffin Bay Stakeholder Work Group. And it is a stakeholder-led group that participates in the better understanding of what's going on in Baffin Bay. A lot of researchers are involved. A lot of local landowners are involved. And it's a really good example of community engagement to address this concern. Now, the majority of the fish kill investigations that the Kills and Spills team participates in, it's usually dissolved oxygen related. And many times our investigations are a result of an algal bloom. And we're talking about blooms that don't produce toxins. We're talking about blooms that wind up sucking up oxygen. Now, earlier in my presentation, I mentioned that algae produces oxygen, and which is true. However, there's two things that occur that results in a low dissolved oxygen event. And I'm going to talk, first of all, I'm going to talk about our diurnal events. So we're out there in the water column, the bloom occurs, and maybe a good bloom, non-toxin producing bloom. And these blooms bring in a lot of fish. And so they come in, they're feeding, it's a buffet. They're just going to town on this bloom and just eating and eating and eating. But during the daytime, this bloom is producing a lot of oxygen. So the fish have a lot of oxygen. All these guys are coming in, feeding on it. Everybody is just really happy in this area until nighttime. Algae use the sun through photosynthesis, produces oxygen, and it enters in the water column. However, at nighttime, their metabolic process switches from producing oxygen to consuming oxygen. So now we got all these fish that are feeding on this bloom and all these zooplankton that are feeding on this bloom, loving life. But at nighttime, they're consuming oxygen. And now the algae is consuming oxygen, which then results in oxygen just crashing and no oxygen at nighttime. So this is what we call a diurnal event. And this is one of the most common investigations that we come across, or sources of the fish kill kills that we have along the Texas coast. The second one is bloom death. We may not necessarily have diurnal event, but when the bloom actually crashes, the decomposition of that bloom will also suck up the oxygen and resulting in a fish kill. So those are two HAB-related events due to creating a hypoxia environment that we consider HABs. And then we've got the toxin production ones. So the two most common species of toxin producing harmful algal blooms in Texas are Dinophysis, Carina brevis. The toxins are produced by Dinophysis okadaic acid. It's a diuretic shellfish poisoning, resulting in closures of shellfish harvesting. From Carina brevis, it produces a brevetoxin, and it's a neurotic shellfish poisoning. And it results, again, in closures of shellfish harvestings, but it also causes respiratory irritation and results in fish kills. Now, Texas Parks and Wildlife's response to both of these events is enforcing closures to shellfish harvesting. We do not, in this example, we do not issue the closures. That's by the Texas Department of State Health Services. However, our game wardens do enforce those closures. In the case of red tide, causing fish kills, that's where we come in and we go out there and conduct our assessments to document and estimate the mortalities related to these events. Now, we do have challenges in Texas when it comes to our response, especially, for example, red tides along the coast. It impacts multiple jurisdictions. There's no designated state lead for coordinating these events. Unlike an oil spill along the coast and coastal waters, General Land Office oversees response, hazardous substance release, TCQ oversees the response. There's no state designated lead for these types of events. So many times each agency monitors or assesses it based on their agency's needs. However, the state did develop what's a group called the Toxic Substance Coordinating Committee. And real quick, the mission of the committee is to protect and promote the health of people in Texas through the prevention and control of adverse health effects related to toxic substances and harmful physical agents. This is accomplished through interagency coordination of regulation development, health risk assessments, cooperative studies, information dissemination, and public education efforts. Now, within this substance coordinating group, there is a TexHab work group. It's a subcommittee of it, and it provides a mechanism for coordinating response efforts. This is a group that's open to the public and generally includes folks from federal agencies such as NOAA, EPA, and also USGS, and also folks from the state such as TCQ, Texas Department of State Health Services, Texas Animal Health Commission, et cetera. And it also includes our academic partners and local jurisdictions and the general public. I really cannot explain how important it is this group is to maintain that information dissemination and development of that partnership. Through this work group, this is how we generally coordinate our responses in, say, for example, the Dinophysis bloom and also red tide. It's an information sharing, and it really helps to coordinate monitoring efforts, et cetera. So moving on, we've gone through that, and we're going to go ahead and focus on coastal resiliency and the strategies to help maintain coastal resiliency during a harmful algal bloom. We're going to focus on red tide because it's an example of how multiple jurisdictions are impacted and how that coordination goes into the prevention, mitigation, and how monitoring plays into those strategies moving forward. So real quick, Controls, the really small bubble, I'm using my pointer real quick. And so there really is no controlling mechanism to control blooms in the coastal waters of Texas. However, the use of prevention and mitigation helps offset that control, the control. Now, mitigation includes early warnings of the emergence or increased risks of HABs or hypoxia. And then monitoring reduces the risk through include mitigation impacts and provide accurate information and predictive data for making management decisions. And then prevention is a strategy for minimizing excess nutrient inputs. So first of all, I want to focus on the prevention aspects strategy. So first of all, to reduce or prevent blooms, we've got to reduce that excess nutrient loads. Nutrients is not a bad thing. It's needed. The issue is when there's too much of a good thing. And that's what generally results in these harmful algal blooms. The nutrient loading is an important factor contributing to the coastal hypoxia. It's generally the principal source of nutrients that sustain coastal eutrophication among varying systems. So if we look at this graphic, the inputs are from land. So it could be industrial, could be agricultural, could be municipalities. It just could be non-point source runoff related from just all activities in general. And additionally, there's also atmospheric deposition of nutrients. So combined with all of that, we get these excessive loadings into our base systems. So where significant rivers enter the coastal zone, nutrient loads associated with the freshwater discharges are usually the predominant source. So we've got a lot of rivers that result in these inputs of nutrient loadings. However, moving from the upper coast to the lower coast, our riverine systems start decreasing in the amount of fresh water entering into the system. So coastal systems lacking in substantial riverine inputs may receive nutrients via submarine ground discharges or directly from atmospheric deposition. So it may not necessarily be riverine discharges, it may be other sources. So the biggest challenge, as I mentioned before, is understanding how eutrophication may exacerbate blooms in terms of frequency, duration, and intensity of the bloom. So that requires a lot of interaction and partnerships. And so reducing nutrient loads is a strategic goal to prevent HAB-related fish kills. So here's Texas Parks and Wildlife's way of preventing algal blooms. And the strategy is to remove the source of the blooms, the nutrients. So we're a commenting agency. So we comment on wastewater discharges. These are point sources where we know that nutrients are coming from. And that includes commenting on discharge permits, wastewater discharge permits. We also, Section 404 permits includes construction activities. So as a commenting agency, we also provide recommendations to minimize impacts of loadings from either the construction activity itself or whatever that activity is going to produce, whether it's a residential canal, subdivision, etc. Another important part, and I think it's extremely important, is the development of partnerships in these work groups. Now, right here, I've got a list of different work groups that we participate in. It's not all inclusive. The agency as a whole has a land and water strategy to help provide to protect fish and wildlife resources. The agency has a branch, a water resources branch, that focuses on the complex issues of water quality and water quantity. And we participate in that work group. And that's just our internal. Our wildlife folks also work with landowners in developing BMPs to help offset loadings that may impact our water resources. So this is internally, we've got a really skilled group of folks that help with the prevention. But additionally, we also are able to participate in many of these work groups. And these work groups help us gain a better understanding of what's going on with that particular system in that particular area of the state. Every water body within the state has its unique signature and different factors that may contribute to loadings into that water system, and then how that water system responds to those loadings. So participating in these work groups helps us, provide guidance to minimize loadings into the system, thus minimizing impacts to fish and wildlife resources, helps us gain an understanding of the localized areas and the different triggers or mechanisms that may be in play in that particular section of the water body. And it also enhances our skill set and our knowledge of what's going on in that system. So whenever there is a fish kill, we have this network, we have this understanding of the location, and it helps us with our just general knowledge and skills to conduct an investigation. So moving on to bloom monitoring as a mitigation strategy. This is a really cool network that the state of Texas has. We've got really amazing universities that have adopted and purchased and managed these image flow cytobot water monitoring systems. This system, it can continuously monitor. It can be deployed into the water and continuously take water samples, or water samples can be collected and brought to the lab and then run through these systems. Now they've got a library which has got all these HABs pre-identified, and they'll take a photograph of each cell that runs through the system, and then quantify and identify what that species is through that library. Now, if a HAB is identified, and if it meets a certain density threshold, meaning cells per mil, then Parks and Wildlife and Texas Department of Sales Services will get notified, and that'll trigger our response, hopefully before a fish kill mortality event occurs, or something even more dramatic and impact to the shellfish. So these sentinel stations have been integral in our response, the state's response to harmful algal blooms. Again, they're funded by universities have purchased them, and it's an information sharing coordination, and we really value and appreciate these tools that the universities use to help us with our state response. So here we go. We get notification of a bloom. Then we reach out to our partners, and federal partners include NOAA, includes Padre Island National Seashore, USGS, et cetera. Our state partners, Texas Department of Sales Services, Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, us, and also Texas Department of Animal Health. Our academic partners, I can just go down the line of all of our academic partners, letting them know, and then they'll send out and go out and collect water samples. And I also want to talk about our citizen scientists. So we go out there, various folks are doing various samplings, collecting water samples. Some are also using satellite imagery to help us determine the extent of the bloom. But our volunteers, the Red Tide Rangers down at South Padre Island, are an amazing group of folks that go out there on a daily basis, collect water samples, take it back to the lab, analyze the samples through microscope, counting the number of red tide cells per mil, and report back to us. So down the list, from federal partners to citizen scientists, we've got a pretty good network of folks. But that doesn't mean that there isn't information gaps that occur up and down the coast. But I just wanted to highlight and say my kudos to these citizen scientists down at South Padre Island who do an amazing job whenever there's a red tide bloom. So the other part of mitigating the impact is communicating it, getting out to the general population. Let folks know where the bloom's occurring, where there's respiratory issues going on, and where we're seeing fish kills. And this happens, again, with our partnerships to go out there, collect the water samples. They provide us cell count data. It goes into our status, current status of red tide. Our fish kill assessment information also gets pulled together and provided in these inputs. The other part, the key of information also comes from our staff out in the field who are conducting the routine samplings, what their observations are, and also reports from the general public. So you guys along the coast, every time y'all send us a report, it helps us develop a picture of the bloom's extent and the impacts that are going on. So yes, the general public is part of our response. And I just want to make sure I thank you guys out there who help contribute with our information. So as I mentioned, it goes to our website, our HAB website that it produces updates, not on a daily basis, but on Wednesdays and Fridays during the bloom. We also have a Facebook page. Now this is right at the beginning of Facebook, we adopted this and tried to use it as another source of distributing information. The cool thing about our Facebook page, it allows us to distribute the information, but also we get input on what's going on. So we'll also receive observations via Facebook on where the impact is, where they're having respiratory issues, where they're seeing dead fish, etc. And that helps us to, again, develop this operational picture and on how we're going to respond. So again, the cell count data that we compile from all of these sources gets sent to NOAA, and NOAA produces this Gulf of Mexico harmful algal bloom bulletin. Included is the distribution of where red tide is, the bloom is along the Texas coast, mainly along the coast, not necessarily in the bays, but it helps us, again, develop that operational picture. It's colored in a way of where the bloom, based on chlorophyll, and helps give us an indication of the bloom intensity. It also provides estimations or predictions on where respiratory irritation may be felt. And that's coming online, and this is the most recent bloom report that we've had during the red tide event, but NOAA's gone on and have updated and is developing a new improved bulletin. Super excited to see how that comes out. So as I mentioned, we're tasked with investigating fish kills, enumerating the impacts. So all of that information provided by stakeholders, provided by partners, etc., helps develop an operational picture on where we're seeing the most distribution of fish. It's not uncommon for us to just say there's dead fish everywhere, especially in red tide events. But it helps us strategically determine the sampling segments and where we're going to send off our teams. Now remember, we've got resource management folks. This is a pretty high intense staffing response, because we're not necessarily stopping our normal operations. We're continuing our fisheries monitoring. We're still working on our enhancement folks at the hatcheries. So we still got operations going on that need to be maintained, which is part of this response and our recovery. So we've got these teams. We go out there and we get this information. They enumerate, they identify the species, as well as taxon, and also gives us the numbers. We compile that information to develop an estimation, a minimal estimation of the fisheries that were impacted. Now, this information gets taken and submitted up to Austin to develop our method of making management decisions to contribute to the coastal resiliency of Texas following a red tide event or harmful algal bloom event. So we've got, as I mentioned, our resource monitoring. We're going out there collecting samples. This is a long-term monitoring that's been going on for many years, decades even. And so we're able to see the responses and recoveries of these harmful algal bloom events as they occur. Fish kill assessments give us a good picture of what the minimum impact is and gives a really good proportion of the resources that are impacted. So the resources that are mostly impacted are foraging species. That's not uncommon, but there's usually a small percentage. Well, small percentage doesn't necessarily mean a small number of fish, but proportionally of the entire the resources that were impacted, it's generally smaller of our more sought after species such as sea trout, red drum, sheep's head, black drum, etc. Now this helps us with making management decisions. So we've got our resource monitoring, which has a long term and will also document the recovery of those resources. We've also got this assessment impact, and all of this information, along with public comments, goes to making resource management decisions. Now, these decisions could include anything. We've got a lot of knobs that we can turn to help with the recovery of the impacted resources following a HAB event. Worst case scenario, emergency action, such as temporary changes in bag limits and size limits. Also, there's other strategies that we can put in place. Just helping provide guidance to folks. Maybe hold off on collecting, spotted sea trout for maybe a month. Just general education and outreach type information. Also, just including angler ethics. We've got really good partners within the fisheries community, within the state that are amazing and help us share this information. Another strategy is increasing our hatcheries production of selected species like spotted sea trout or red drum, depending on the resources that were impacted. That also contributes to our resource management decisions in moving forward and aiding in the recovery of the fisheries that were impacted. So hopefully this synthesizes our overall assessment and our strategy for mitigating the impacts to harmful algal events through our proactive approach to prevent these, and then how we help mitigate through providing information to the general public on where the location of the bloom is, et cetera. And then following the actual impact, the recovery of our fisheries resources, and the strategies we use to aid in that recovery. So following that, I thank y'all very much for allowing me to present to this. So if y'all have any questions, we'll be able to answer them.
Hey, Alex, great job. Thank you so much. Wow, a ton of information. I'm still trying to take it all in. It's I have a feeling you just shared the tip of the iceberg, but wow, there's a lot of complex work that goes on behind the scenes, not just with your organization and you, but all the various players in there. And a couple of things occurred to me in your presentation just about the nature of the coastal zone. So if we look at that delineation specifically, it's about 4 million acres. So it covers a piece of every county touching the coast, basically. So sometimes you deal with a needle in the haystack type of issue of the causal factors. And so are there certain things that, or certain limitations of certain things that you might look at and being able to connect the dots and as to any kind of a causal factor, or is there any instance you can think of where you're able to do that, back to the particular, a particular algal bloom?
Yeah, so a lot of times whenever we are conducting our investigations, it's not just us counting the fish and enumerating the fish, but we also collect water quality data, which includes salinity, temperature, dissolved oxygen, and pH. Those are a lot of good indicators to help us kind of choose how we're going to move towards assessing it. We also collect water samples. And we've got the ability to collect water samples, take it back to the lab, and identify whether a bloom is there or not. We also have other sources of information, such as tidal gauges, wind gauges, that collect near real-time information. And so that helps us to, let's just use dissolved oxygen, diurnal event. That helps us to determine or help contribute through weight of evidence approach that is related to that bloom. Many times there's other mechanisms that are in play during these diurnal blooms, such as low water movement, low winds, and high water temperatures. So all that information helps us develop an assessment or determine the source of the kill based on the weight of evidence approach. We may not necessarily be out there and capture that low DO event, but knowing how the system reacts to an algal bloom, along with all of these other factors, using a weight of evidence approach is another way that we use to determine the source and cause of a mortality event.
Thank you. And we do have some questions in the chat box while we're looking at those, and Brian DeSanti is getting ready to help queue those up for us. Alex, if you'd like, you could go ahead and close your screen share, if you don't mind. And while you're doing that, Brian, would you like to queue us up for the first question, please?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Brian DeSanti. I'm a NOAA Coastal Management Fellow at the Texas General Land Office. I work alongside Jason in the Water Resources Division. Yeah, please continue to type questions in the chat box as we go. But we'll start with Timothy Love has a couple questions for us to start it off. And so the first question, or a couple questions, is the algae problem a problem with eutrophication, or more nitrogen and phosphorus selecting for different species of algae, like the toxic algae, and could reducing the level of nutrients allow the problem of the algae to go away?
Yeah, so definitely reducing the amount of nutrients in the system would help mitigate the impact. It's really not known what really triggers the bloom, but the excess nutrients in the system is what will maintain the bloom. So yeah, as I mentioned before, as part of our prevention strategy to prevent algal blooms, the big effort is to reduce eutrophication or reduce the nitrate loadings, which will contribute to eutrophication in the system. So yes, absolutely.
All right. The second half of that question, part of this question, I know you touched on some of it during the presentation, was how's the TPWP trying to reduce the issue since they're not regulating point and non-point source discharges of nutrients?
Yeah, great question. So we are a commenting agency. So we do have the ability to speak to wastewater discharge permits. And so that's on the point source area. The non-point source is where we provide technical guidance within these different work groups that we highlighted in the presentation. We really don't, it's hard to measure the impact of that nutrient loadings unless it's a TMDL or something like that. But our efforts to participate in these work groups, providing that technical guidance, hopefully goes to help mitigate those loadings. We also have in our wildlife division folks that work with landowners to help implement different management practices to improve or manage for a particular group of organisms. And that includes measures to be protective of the waters. So that's another kind of tool that we use to help reduce the loadings of nutrients into the water column or into the systems. So it really is a partnership-based strategy, not necessarily a regulatory strategy.
Yeah, thank you for kind of clarifying you guys' role and what you're doing to kind of help, in these situations. Got another question asking about, are red tide blooms occurring more often? And if so, is this because we're having trouble controlling nutrient loading to these areas? And then on that is, do we need additional funding monitoring to improve these efforts?
So we had a researcher here at the Hart Research Institute in Corpus Christi had a student that looked at the trends with red tides, and what we are seeing is, yes, we are seeing an increase of red tides from within the past 10, 20 years in frequency and duration and impacts along the coast. Any efforts to reduce nutrient loadings will reduce blooms as a whole, and then would hopefully reduce harmful algal blooms, not just red tides, but any other algal blooms. Additional funding, yeah, always. That's a really good question, and I don't think anybody would ever say we don't need any more monitoring for funding. In many instances, what we're seeing is funding being taken away for monitoring. So anytime we can get those dollars back to water quality monitoring, enhanced water quality monitoring is very important. A lot of times we hear we don't want to monitor just to monitor, but you've got to monitor to determine the trends of what's going on in that system. So I'm a big advocate for increased water quality monitoring.
All right, thank you. Kind of along those lines as well, during the 2020 storm season, did you see an increase or decrease in HABs as well as just other algal blooms?
During the 2020 season, we did not see, Parks and Wildlife did not necessarily respond to more HAB-related mortality events than usual. So it's been consistent with other years, at least along the coast. And a lot of times, as I mentioned, it's a lot of these events that occur during low wind events, low minimum tides, and a lot of fish coming in to feed on those the blooms themselves.
All right, and this one's actually about your presentation, is those first couple pictures you had in the first few slides. What were the species in the photograph? They're asking if it was Dinophysis and Cornea brevis. You're still on mute.
Apologies. The ones with the toxin producing were Dinophysis and Cornea brevis cells. The bloom with the pollution event was on the left hand was trichodesmia, blue-green algae, And then on the right was Noctiluca bloom.
Now I'm still muted. Do you need coastal communities to host or otherwise help the floating water monitoring devices?
Yeah, that's do we need them? That would be nice. They are pricey pieces of equipment, and getting them networked in is also difficult. But yeah, I mean, these Sentinel stations, these image flow cytobots, are amazing tools that we use, it's been very helpful for Texas Parks and Wildlife and Department of State Services in gearing up for our response, instead of being leaning backwards during these responses, being caught flat-footed. We're able to lean forward and be able to initiate and execute our response activities.
Thank you. We've covered a lot of what's going on, where's all this data. Just for like everybody out there, where can we access this data? Where is it available to us?
Which data set? So the cell count data, the fish kill data,
the data for the cell counts, or even the fish kill data, just any of these issues that are a result of these blooms.
Yeah, so we do our fish kill data is uploaded into our database. It's called the Pollution Response Inventory of Species Mortality, or PRISM. So all of our investigations and reports related to fish kill events and pollution events are all housed in our PRISM database. The red tide cell count data is, I'm going to have to get back with you on that, but NOAA has a portal or access location where they can actually get that cell count data.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Brian. We do have one final question from Ellis Pickett to round out our Q&A. Back in the 90s, Surfside Beach had a couple of years of very high algal blooms. What has been the historical trend?
Well, a lot of times for algal blooms, TCQ does routine monitoring, and the indicator for blooms is chlorophyll. And a lot of times, if you want to see the trend in that particular area, they've got a database that you can go. It's relatively easy to access, but you can pull data from that and see if there's increases or decreases within that segment. And that may be a good source of information, but generally speaking, blooms are hard to predict, and they are indicators of eutrophication if it continually occurs. And that's where we're trying to get a really good understanding if it's happening or not, or if the trend is increasing or not. So I really don't have a good answer for you on that. But if you are really, interested, I would direct you to the SWCM database, Surface Water Quality Monitoring database from the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality.
Another potential resource is last year, Hart Research Institute out of Texas A&M Corpus released a coastal report card, and that included phytoplankton. And I don't know how the historical nature was treated in particular to speak to that, but if folks are interested in that, at least the report card on the phytoplankton and other water quality as well as habitat issues were addressed in the report card. It's fairly easy to find if you search HRI Coastal Report Card Texas A&M Corpus. Well, if you've never presented before to a large group of people on Zoom, just to let you know, it's kind of unnerving and a little bit awkward to be talking to yourself, whether you're looking at the boxes or not. Alex, you did a fantastic job with this. We want to thank you for your time to share your expertise. We definitely know that we just scratched the surface. There's a lot of other particular aspects that we could have addressed. We might have you back as well later on down the line. But if we're in a room, we'd give you a big round of applause right now. So we'll just do it here verbally for you. Thank you so much. For everyone else, there could be some particular links. There we go. Brian put the link of the coastal report card into the chat box. We'll leave the meeting open just for a couple of minutes in case you want to take any of these links out of the chat box. And Leah's here to, I think, talk about a poll.
Yes, I am. Thanks, Jason. So I've got one more poll that just launched, and folks can go ahead and vote right now. Just let us know if you receive our emails, and if you want to subscribe, we'll go ahead and add you to our subscription list right after this call wraps up. We've also dropped a number of links to other upcoming things in the chat. Next month, we're going to be having another Lunch and Learn. Jason, do you want to give a little promo, or should I?
Please do, Leah.
Yeah, so next month, we're going to have one of our Coastal Collaborative partners give a presentation. His name's Tom Hegemeyer, and he is an engineer with Doucette and Associates Engineering. He's going to be talking about retrofitting and ways that you can renovate your community and existing space there to better address stormwater quality concerns. So we'll be sharing, there is a link in the chat right now. That's kind of a save the date Eventbrite. You can get the link there, register, get all set. But we'll be sharing more information on that in the future. So that's another reason why it's great to subscribe to our emails.
Thank you, Leah. And by the way, retrofitting is very timely for this conversation here. As Alex referenced, he didn't necessarily say the word, but non-point source pollution. These are pollutant loadings coming from diffuse sources. So one of the ideas behind retrofitting is to reimagine the current land use and construct a new land use that brings about better water quality changes. So don't let that word scare you away. Tom's a great speaker. He'll have lots of visuals and lots of fun stories to tell. We want to thank our Leah Cuddyback. Unfortunately, this is going to be her last Lunch and Learn with us, as she's accepted another position, but wanted to thank her for her contributions to the Clean Coast Texas team from Meadows Center. So thank you, Leah.
Thanks, Jason.
And we'd also like to make sure that you're aware of our Clean Coast Texas website. We'll put that link here in just a second for additional resources. We've just launched our latest sustainable drainage manual built specifically for our Texas coast, and that's in there that might be of interest to you. And finally, on behalf of our team and our teams of teams, thank you all for spending some time with us today. We'll see you next month.
Thanks all.